Here we're going to use Ohm's law to help us understand the relationships between voltage, current, and resistance across a cell membrane. And so first let's come to the figure here and look at some of the components. First we have our lipid bilayer here, and we also have an embedded ion channel here. And that's going to affect the ability of charge to pass across this membrane. Okay, so how do we end up with a charge separation across this membrane, which by definition is a voltage? A voltage is a spatial separation of charge, which is a form of stored energy. You think of this as a battery, right? Put a little pole on the top of here and write Duracell on it, and we have a battery. So how do we set this up? Well, we set it up through the leak largely of potassium ions. Right? Potassium ions are allowed to leak out of the cell after being pumped into the cell by the sodium potassium pump. And as they leak out, they are added to the extracellular fluid adjacent to the membrane here. And they're leaving behind a region of low density positive charge, and therefore the negative charges dominate. And so we have this voltage set up through potassium leak. That's a form of stored energy. Now, how is that voltage related to current and resistance? Well, we can see that voltage is directly proportional to both current, I, and resistance, R. But it's sometimes easier to understand their relationships if we solve Ohm's law for current, for I. And so let's do that. So I is going to equal voltage divided by resistance. So our current flow, what is that? Well, a current flow is the movement of charge in response to this voltage gradient, this electrical gradient. And so the larger the voltage, the greater the driving force for current flow, directly proportional. Conversely, resistance is inversely proportional to the current flow. In this picture, resistance is set up by our lipid bilayer, which actually has a very high resistance to ion flux. We have sodium ions or other ions out here, calcium ions. They would be repelled by this membrane, right? They're polar. But if we add an ion channel, we have just dramatically reduced the resistance to ion flux across this membrane. And so you can see if resistance were to go down dramatically through the presence of leak channels or gated channels that are become opened, our low resistance would generate a very high current flow, aiding the dissipation of this voltage. We usually call that depolarization when we're having positive ions enter the cell, sodium or calcium, and cancel out this negative charge on the inside. Essentially, right, creating an environment where the voltage, the separation of charge between outside and inside, measured by our voltmeter here, is dissipated.